I love that I'm back here again. You can't spell fun without UN, so it's always a great place to be at the end of the day. And I also happen to really love this stage because it kind of makes me feel like I'm Phil Donahue. And I've got a couch and I've got a studio audience. So first of all, hi to all of you. Hi to everybody who's watching around the world at home. And today's talk show episode, if you will, is part of our Global Stage series. And those are conversations that we have all around the world on issues at the intersection of technology, politics, and society in partnership with Microsoft. In the past 5 years, our Global Stage videos and live streams have been viewed nearly 50 million times. I am so proud of the work that we're doing together and of the critically important conversations we have like this one today. So this year, we've heard a consistent message across global forums. In Davos, it was warnings about the growing AI divide and what that means. In Delhi, we saw major commitments to expand access and capability. And of course, we're looking forward to Geneva this summer and AI for Good, where we'll focus on how AI can actually deliver for development. And we have the right three people here with us. And they happen to all have been on Global Stage at one time or another, so I'm grateful to have you all back. Lisa Monaco is the President of Global Affairs for Microsoft. We have Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who's the Secretary General of ITU. And of course, Parvathaneni Harish, the Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations. Welcome, Ambassador. Welcome, all of you. Yeah. So I want to start back in Davos, because that was the first time we really talked at length about Microsoft's AI diffusion report. And that report is called A Widening Digital Divide. It doesn't use language like bridging that divide, or it's a warning, right? Is that a fair assessment? And why are we heading in the wrong direction?
Well, I think you've really put the focus where it should be, which is on a sense of urgency to address this widening divide. But first, let me say thank you for having me here back on the global stage and here in the Goals Lounge. And thanks to Anne-Marie and well as the UN Office of Partnerships for convening us. And it's great to be sharing the stage with Doreen and the ambassador. So a few things. I think really when we talk about this widening divide, and it is indeed widening, we have to focus on really that this is, in fact, a symptom of a broader divide. And that really is the biggest divide we see in society right now, which is an economic divide between the global north and the global south. And what's at the root of that, actually, is a technological divide, which is rooted in access to electricity. I think it's really fitting that we're here in New York, just a few miles from the site a little over 140 years ago when Thomas Edison flipped a switch, quite literally, on the first ever power plant in Lower Manhattan. But today, 144 years later, more than 700 million people are still without access to electricity. And that is predominantly in the global south and in Africa. And so when you think about, as we at Microsoft believe, if AI can truly be that engine of prosperity and the technology that lifts us up, it will only happen if we close that gap. If we close that gap in access to electricity and connectivity. We do so in great partnership with ITU on those issues. So really, we have to address that access issue. So the other barriers that we've identified in our research, and we have now issued 2 AI diffusion reports just in the last year, and both of those 6 months apart, and both of those reports really show this widening divide, this kind of yawning gap between the global north and the global south when it comes to the working age population in society actively using AI. 25% in the global north, about 14% in the global south. And in both those reports, we see that gap widening about at twice the rate in the north versus the south. So what can we do to kind of arrest that widening gap? I think it's attacking 3 things. One is this issue of access to electricity and connectivity. That takes investment, that takes public and private dollars. I think it also goes to skills. right? We know from history that the greatest way to drive economic prosperity is by the adoption of critical and general purpose technologies like AI. But that hinges on skilling. And so we're really trying to attack that issue in tremendous partnership with innovative governments, including, and we'll talk about this with the ambassador, what we're doing in India in partnership with the Indian government. But then we also have to get after the trust deficit, right? Because people will not use technology that they don't trust, and that goes to things like really investing in increasing model capabilities in indigenous languages, right? AI should work as well for people in local languages as it does in English. So those are the types of things we're trying to invest in across the board.
Well, thanks for that. There's so much there that we're going to continue to unpack, because obviously we could talk a lot about trust and skilling. And I'm going to come to Doreen, but first, I want to acknowledge, and actually there was a report that just came out today from Anthropic that said exactly this, that not only is there a divide that's happening between the global north and the global south, which frankly wasn't that all surprising, right? But there are divides within divides. There are divides within developed countries. There are divides among gender populations. I mean, all these things we can touch on here. But first, so ahead of this event, GZERO surveyed our followers across all our social media channels. 5,000 people voted on this question. How are you using AI at work right now? Let me first ask, how many of you use AI daily here in the room? Okay, well, wrong, yeah, not representative perhaps. And would anybody admit to, I never really do it? Anybody? Maybe not in this crowd. All right, well, let's see how people voted. So not surprisingly, and obviously these are people who are already online. They are global, but they're going to come with a certain level of sophistication. 34% said it's essential, and only 6% say they're not doing it at all because it's blocked. But you know, occasionally and rarely are also pretty big there too, okay? So Doreen, understanding how important it is socioeconomically that we bridge all of these kinds of divides, but also confronting the reality of how many crises the world is facing right now, from conflicts that are happening in the Middle East and Ukraine and Africa, to food insecurity, to water scarcity. Make the argument for why we're sitting here right now talking about AI diffusion.
Okay. Let's get started. First of all, thank you. It's great to be here and great to have an opportunity to chat with you again. And this is an awesome venue. So, you know, I think if we look back maybe a couple years ago and we were talking about the connectivity gap, and you were noting that also, Lisa. And so we still have this connectivity gap, right? We have 2.2 billion, I would say it's probably more than that, unconnected people today that are not part of the answer to the question you have just posed, because they're not connected. And so if you're not connected to the digital world, then you're not part of the AI world. And so to your point, why does that matter? Yes, we're in interesting times with all sorts of things happening everywhere. But when we look at artificial intelligence, it has an impact on everything, whether it's education, whether it's agriculture, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transport, the impacts of artificial intelligence, the beneficial impacts are tremendous. And I think that's where we have to go deeper. Picking up on your diffusion report, recognizing that adoption rates are double in the global north than what they are in the global south, and that we have to tackle that connectivity gap because it can help us actually tackle some of the major things that are happening in our world today. So I think we have to close those gaps. And to close those gaps, yes, it's a connectivity issue, but on top of that, it's also an affordability challenge. So we're never going to get the world connected if we do not deal in a serious way with the affordability challenges. In developing countries, it's often maybe 20% of your monthly income is going towards being connected. When we have this UN Broadband Commission target that says it should be 2% or less than your monthly GNI. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge around devices. It's a challenge around services as well. So we have to tackle that piece. And then, as you already mentioned, it's the skilling piece. Connecting alone doesn't essentially do anything. You need people to be empowered. How do you use that connectivity? We often call it the usage gap. So you have the opportunity to be connected, but you're not connected. So how do we push for advanced skilling, not just amongst ourselves, amongst policy leaders, but also looking at academic institutions? I mean, it's a bit, how do we transform education of the future? It's about the workforce of the future as well.
Right, and moving from I dabble in AI tools to I'm actually fluent in them is a huge divide as well, right? And Ambassador, all these things were front and center in Delhi. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, no, really ambitious and lots of robust conversations. And to me, you know, India is a real microcosm of, even though it's a huge country, of all these things that we're talking about, because you have really such advanced innovation already happening and investment, but also rural areas and populations that are outside of connectivity. So what do you hope the world took away from Delhi last month, and what did India take away from the world?
It's a good question, Tony. I think for us, after Bletchley Park, Seoul, and Paris, where a lot of the focus was on safety, when it came to Delhi, the whole focus was on end use. What does it mean for our citizens? As the Secretary General correctly noted, we cannot allow AI to be between 1 or 2 nations and a couple of billionaires. It should mean something concrete for our citizens. And here, the focus of the Impact Summit in Delhi was on affordability, accessibility, and accountability, as far as the Global South countries were concerned. A lot of the focus was on what does it mean for our citizens in their day-to-day lives. In the run-up to the summit, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, a lot of interest was generated among multiple stakeholders. Students in schools, universities, research institutions, industry. We had a lot of competitions and hackathons leading up to it. We had, for example, in dealing with the gender issue, AI by Her initiative, where women entrepreneurs came and put forth these cases. So a couple of things emerged. In India, affordability, as you rightly said, is a major point. The first thing we did was to bring down the cost of access to internet, not through fixed line connections, but through mobile telephony. So today in India, the cost of access to internet is the lowest in the world. Very affordable, even for a country of 1.4 billion with a per capita of around $3,000. And the data usage in India per capita is one of the highest in the world because of the affordability factor. Then came in the government on what can you do with a situation where data is cheap and people are consuming huge amounts of data. The focus then shifted to digital public infrastructure. So what do you do to ensure people have biometric-based identification systems? How can you ensure that government uses digital platforms for government-citizen interface, driving licenses, birth certificates, car registrations, house registrations, etc.? What can you do to ensure that we shift to digital payment solutions so that you move a significant part of the informal economy to a more formalized economy? Each one of these has been hugely successful in different realms. So DPIs became a big tool to involve citizens, involve industry, and the government. Now when we come to AI, the immediate use case scenarios present themselves in terms of how can AI turbocharge and act as a force multiplier for the existing DPIs, or digital public infrastructure. For example, how can a farmer in a field benefit from AI? So what can you do to help an illiterate farmer access this information? So you have voice-activated systems whereby they can, in very different languages. The other issue is multilingualism. You don't want AI to be limited only to English speakers. So in people's own languages, how can they use voice identification systems to access AI? Can a farmer simply take a photograph, speak into an app, and upload it so that he is given information about what is the problem with his crop, what kind of fertilizer or pesticide he needs to use, what crop practices he must adopt? People in remote areas who need healthcare access, a good use study is retinopathy. Just a photograph of an eye will indicate diabetes retinopathy, whether a person is afflicted with that or not. Coughing into a phone can be a very good indicator to know whether a person has tuberculosis, even before they are able to visit a specialized hospital to diagnose it. So in this manner, a number of case studies, forest fires. One of the things, as I said, we had these competitions among entrepreneurs. So some of the things they did, forest fires. How can AI systems help to detect forest fires, say in the Himalayan region, and alert what can be done to control those? So the entire focus was not on multi-hundred billion or trillion-dollar investments, or on large language models or frontier models. The focus was on what does it mean to common folks? What does it mean for citizens? And how can it improve their daily lives?
And those last mile use cases are incredibly exciting, and obviously they're the goal, right? But there are a number of steps that have to be taken before that, and a number of barriers, unfortunately, before those things become truly successful. I want to share one more audience poll. So we asked our followers, what would make the biggest difference in closing the global AI divide? Infrastructure investment, AI education, of course we're talking about skilling there, workforce training, open and shared AI tools, strong global partnerships. I'm going to assume it's all of the above, right? But let's talk about investment for a second, and let's start with you, Lisa, because Microsoft has announced $50 billion towards these efforts. ITU has commitments in the $80 billion range, pledges. This sounds like a lot of money, but A, is it for what we're really trying to do here? And B, how do we make sure it's being used correctly?
So two very good questions. First, let me say the use cases and the description the ambassador described were really spot on, and it's wrapped up in the title of the summit, the AI Impact Summit. I was in India in November, and I was told multiple times that Prime Minister Modi specifically insisted on impact being in the title, and you understand why, because it's about having AI actually solve real-world problems, and that's exactly what you described. And I think that goes to some of the questions you're posing to the audience. So you're right, we announced that we are on track, and we did this actually at the Impact Summit. We are on track to invest $50 billion by 2030 just in infrastructure in the Global South. And I really want to emphasize in the Global South. Let's get back to the point here. How do we urgently close that divide between the global north and the global south? And it means investment, yes, in infrastructure like data centers and access to compute and the connectivity that Doreen mentioned. I would say one step towards this is continuing Doreen's leadership at the ITU. That would be a great way to continue focusing on access to connectivity. But it also means investment in skilling, right? So, getting this, what I call the flywheel going, right? Investment and India is a perfect example of this when you look at the young and growing population and what India has done with digital public infrastructure. There's a tremendous opportunity now to kind of do a leapfrog or a kind of catch up in economic prosperity and development by really doing what India has done with digital public infrastructure now with AI. So that means infrastructure investment, data centers, access to connectivity, and access to electricity. That means means investment in skilling efforts. We've also announced that we aim to provide essential critical AI skills, not just literacy, but actually skills that translate into employability in jobs, 20 million people by 2030 in India, working with educators and also working with learners, getting at both aspects of this. So I really think that the skilling piece is critical, but also getting that flywheel going, because you won't get investment, you won't generate that investment in the infrastructure piece unless you can guarantee the demand, which you only will get if you invest in the skilling. So it really is a virtuous cycle if we're doing it right.
Let's take a look at how people voted, because you might be surprised to see skilling came out on top by quite a lot. Doreen, does that surprise you? And can you really have one of these without all the others?
Well, I would say all of the above, but I guess it doesn't surprise me that the skilling piece is so important, but I think it also, we have to keep in mind the foundational infrastructure pieces, because you have to have that kind of first before the skilling piece. And also, you know, kudos to the ambassador into India, because it was quite an incredible impact summit with no less than 250,000 people buzzing in the hallways. And it was quite incredible. And I think also to India, I think India is a great case in demonstrating the political will and commitment. The DPI example, and as the Prime Minister also said, DPI together with AI, that's kind of the future. And so having those pieces integrated, and you could see it happening in the solutions as you just described, that's what we need in terms of thinking about the future and thinking about hope and thinking about what's needed to create an AI that does benefit humanity. But when it comes specific to the skilling piece, so we see lots of estimates about how artificial intelligence is going to transform the workforce. And we've seen estimates that 170 million new jobs will be created, maybe 90 million jobs will be lost or won't exist. And so, you know, something in between. So how do we ensure that we're prepared? And I think that the skilling piece is fundamental. That's why the ITU, working closely with Microsoft, we put together the AI Skilling Coalition. So we have about 70 partners. We're offering courses on a range of different topics to help advance AI skilling, not just for leaders, but also for the public at large. We're also working with a number of member states, and I think there's some great examples of countries, Rwanda being a great example of how they're advancing a nationwide AI skilling program. UAE has a very robust program. Tajikistan has just announced that they're going to make this mandatory. And so to see governments, because I think it does need government leadership, it also needs a strong partnership, to your point about partnership with the private sector. And so I think when it comes to skilling, we need comprehensive approaches, and we do need government leadership, not just on the ICT side, but of course with ministries of education, to make sure that the curricula is available, that the basics are offered at an early age, I would argue elementary school at this point. And of course also to see what India is doing on that front, because that's already happening on a state level.
And to that point, so taking a bit of a global look for just a second, World Bank, I think this was about a year ago, came out with a statistic that I thought was really jaw-dropping, that in the next couple of years, really by 2030, we're going to have 1.2 billion people on the planet age into the workforce, and there are something like 420 million available jobs at the current rate of creation, right? So I wasn't great at math, but even I know those aren't good odds. So how India, with its robust population of more than 1 billion people, how are you approaching not just the today aspect of skilling for your current workforce, but what it means for the future?
I think we approach it with an open mind, most importantly. Not something to be feared, but to use as a technological tool for growth and development. I think AI for development is the mantra. So when AI is a tool it helps everybody from the student to somebody working in the tech industry. Reskilling, upskilling would be a fact of life, let's face it. But the doomsday scenarios of people losing jobs and governments having to give a minimum income to keep people at their current standard of living, I think we don't go by that. I think like any other technological wave before it, it will impact the way people do business. But it need not mean that net-net it would be a negative. Introduction of AI, for example, what we have seen, has brought about digital energized textbooks for students across the country. So if we have 300 to 400 million students, they have access just with a smartphone to scan a QR code of any chapter of any grade and have access to resources to be able to interact with it. AI takes it one level above to give a personalized tutor, a personalized digital tutor to every student. Oh, that's a great asset, and it will really enhance the learning outcomes of students at all levels. So the way we look at it is, yes, it will have an impact at every level. It's a great tool for everyone to have, whatever profession you are in. It will impact certain jobs, but like for instance, even our tech industry, certain coding jobs may have to modify themselves. There may be a different description of what they do. Yet, the human element in every profession will continue to remain vital. We see this across the board in all industries. AI is not a magical bullet that will mean that humans have no role. So, so if you approach with an open mind, AI is a great tool for every segment of the population, for the industry, and more importantly, for governments.
So it's a great tool for every segment of the population, but obviously not every segment of the population is adopting it at the same pace. And one of the divides within the divides is a gender divide. And globally, women are 20 to 25% less likely to be using AI tools right now as their male counterparts. Time for one more survey, folks. So we polled our audience on this very issue and asked, what's the biggest barrier to women participating in the AI economy? Unequal access, lack of targeted training, AI tools that are being built by and for men, and cultural barriers. Let's just take a quick look at how people voted. Interestingly enough, 39% said it's cultural barriers, and then you can see the results there for the others. But I think the question that I would have, and I see Sarah Steinberg sitting right here, who, by the way, is heads up global policy and partnerships at LinkedIn. And I want to come to you just really quickly, because when we talk about impact to workforce and the fact that, yes, a certain number of jobs will disappear because of AI, and a certain number of them will also be created, how do we make sure that the bulk of those jobs that disappear, or even a slight majority, aren't women's jobs?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've been talking about this a lot at the CSW here in New York last week. But you know, what we see at LinkedIn is we looked at the impact of how AI is transforming jobs and also the evolution of the AI workforce, is that women are disproportionately in jobs that we see as likely to be disrupted by AI. So globally, 1 in 3 women works in a job that we classify as sort of likely to be disrupted or significantly changed by AI compared to 1 in 4 men globally. But then when we look at who's building AI skills, we see that women make up just 1/3 of the workforce that has AI skills. And so this poses, you know, one challenge, that women are potentially entering a world in which their jobs are more likely to be disrupted by this technology, and they're less likely to have the skills that they need to move into the new jobs that are being created. But also, I think everyone's been talking about job creation here and economic growth, and the reality is we're living in a, you know, sluggish economy. Hiring is down. Every country is sort of searching for where growth is going to come from. And if we're leaving behind half the population, we're not really going to realize the, you know, economic growth potential and job creation potential of AI transformation.
Thoughts on that? Yeah.
So maybe it's a question to you, Sarah. But I was thinking about the survey responses, and I mean, wouldn't you also say that sometimes women are making choices to not be connected or not be using AI or not participating because of security-related issues, fear, lack of trust? I mean, I think that's also a big impediment. I don't know.
So this is actually an interesting aspect of this conversation that we haven't touched. We could do an entire session on it when it comes to trust. But I guess in that sense, let me turn to you, Lisa, because trust across the board is a huge part of this conversation, and that also involves safety. How are you approaching that as an executive at Microsoft?
So look, we start with the fundamental premise that people won't use technology that they don't trust. Back to our challenge of making AI and this transformative technology an engine of prosperity and inclusion, not a driver of continued and growing division. So that means fostering trust in that technology. That goes to the language issues that the ambassador mentioned, right? How do we encourage and increase the capability of models in a whole host of languages, not just English? How do we make sure that at a time of incredible geopolitical volatility, when countries and governments and customers that we deal with are really concerned about continued reliability of technology and resilience of technology, how do we foster that trust in these technologies? One way we're trying to tackle this is through a host of different partnerships, whether it's our skilling partnerships with the Indian government, trying to get at that 20 million members of the Indian population through scaling across educational institutions, 200,000, I think, across India. But it's also about forming principled partnerships. And what do I mean by that? We joined with 15 other international and global technology providers just a few months ago to announce something called the Trusted Technology Alliance. And we're trying to respond in this group of companies, globally representative across the technology stack, across 4 different continents and 11 different countries, I think, if I counted them up right. We're trying to respond to this concern about resilience, about safety, about trust, and to articulate what do we think that means. Well, we've aligned ourselves now, along with these companies, to a set of core principles about what trusted technology should be about. And fundamentally, it should be about transparent and ethical governance. It should be about secure development. It should be about secure supply chains and oversight of supply chains. And it should be about data protection. And it should be about a commitment to the rule of law. That's what we think, and that's what these other 15 companies that we've joined with think should be the attributes of trusted technology. It shouldn't be about the nationality of the provider, but about the commitments we make to our communities, to customers, and to people who want to use and benefit from this technology.
And it's so interesting because obviously trust touches both, at the nation state level. Do I trust big private sector companies? Do I trust other governments? But it's also at the consumer level. And one of the hindrances to adoption in some instances is I'm either afraid of it or I'm just not sure how to use it. That's a skilling question. I know we're coming up on time, but just really quickly to have each of you, and I'll start with you, Ambassador. A year from now, if we're here, and given that it's us, we probably will be, right, sitting right here, what is one success metric we can start working on right now that will help us when we gather to say, at least we're making progress?
I think every country needs to look at what they can do to make AI accessible to all of their citizens and all of their businesses. I think accessibility, affordability, and accountability are vital. And on the issue of gender that you just discussed, I think I can personally say in India, in the STEM disciplines, we have had a huge representation of women. And in engineering disciplines and in technical disciplines across India. So I think more than anything else, if a technology is accessible and if it is affordable, it would be adopted. Focusing on accessibility and affordability is thus vital. It cannot be just for businesses. It cannot be just for governments. I think the focus should be on our citizens.
Thank you. Doreen?
I completely agree with the ambassador, and the Prime Minister had something, Mahav, or what was it called? It was launched at Manav, yes, which I can't remember what each letter stands for. But again, it goes back to the whole issue of trust and access and affordability. So I'm absolutely on board with what you've just stated. But for me, this time next year, I hope I'm still here, we'll be gearing up for the 2027 AI for Good Global Summit, which will be held back-to-back with the Swiss version of the AI Impact Summit. And I hope by that time we will have advanced the principles in the Trusted Tech Alliance, but also the principles that were adopted by more than 90, I think, countries in the Delhi Declaration. I thought those were the outcome.
The outcome document.
Yeah, I think those were quite important. And I think ultimately for us, it's all about partnerships. And I think we have to recognize that no one's going to get this done alone. We have to partner. And as we look to this year and beyond, I hope that we can partner together, UN, private sector, civil society, technical organizations, to ensure that AI does benefit all.
Look, I couldn't say it any better than Doreen just did when the emphasis on partnerships. I think next year at this time, I hope, when we issue our successive AI diffusion reports that Microsoft has been putting out, I hope what we will see is a closing of that gap between the global south and the global north. That's the metric that we'll be looking at, driving that adoption, that usage level, to make AI, again, a engine of prosperity and inclusion, not one of division.
Lisa Monaco, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, Ambassador Harish, thank you all so much for doing this. It's been terrific. And thank you here in our studio audience and to all of you who are watching. And of course, to the UN Office of Partnerships and Anne-Marie Hu. Just a little programming note, you can see all of our Global Stage content. Just head to gzeromedia.com/global stage. And for all of us at GZERO, I'm Tony Masilis. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.